this house. The house is awake now. Play scary room.
I am a 38-year-old female. The stories I am about to tell you are all true. These stories are about how my cousins and I opened a doorway to the paranormal, unintentionally marking us with a sixth sense from a young age. We have experienced things that cannot be explained. We opened this door more times than I can count, but did not think much of it then. But now that I look back at all the strange things that happened to us, I see where it all began. It was just a game, and we called it Scary Room. When I turned 12, my grandfather passed away. 6 months later, my stepfather passed away. My mother entered a deep depression. She found a very old long trailer home to rent. It was creepy with dark wood interior, to give it an old cabin look. The creepiest part about this trailer was the master bathroom. It was the only room in the house that had a shower. This bathroom had multiple square glass mirrors fixed to most of the walls, top to bottom, with one big mirror above the sink. The mirrors across from each other gave the person standing in the bathroom the infinity effect. It was creepy, like multiple times one behind the other, getting smaller and farther away. The only wall that did not have these mirrors was the wall the toilet was fixed to. I did not have a shower in my bathroom that I shared with my older brother. Fast forward a few weeks after we moved in, a few of my mother's brothers and sisters came over with their family to play cards with my depressed mother. I was 12 years old. One of my brothers is 1 year older, and my youngest brother at the time was 6 years old. We had cousins ranging in the age from 12 to 7 years old. There was 13 of us total that night. If you're raised in a Mexican family, you know. Back in the day, younger siblings and cousins are equally responsible to care for the younger cousins and siblings. We were allowed outside as long as we remained in a big group, and even into the nearby desert as long as we stayed in a group. We rarely made friends of strangers, or even neighbors. We were plenty already to keep busy. The rules were when the street lights came on, we had to come inside, unless we had permission from our parents to stay out after dark. This night after the street lights came on, we realized how many of us there were. This made the living room feel loud and crowded. I put in a movie for the little ones, and the older cousins ages 10 and up went to my mother's room at the end of the trailer, away from all the adults who were smoking in the house, in the kitchen. We did not like it when they did this, but it was not frowned upon to smoke in the house with children back in the days. This was the 90s. In my mother's room, we put music on the radio. We began to talk and joke. The conversation turned into scary stories, Bloody Mary, Candyman, and then we began reading my book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Some time passed, and the little ones came in the room. They started to say,
"We're bored. We want to play with you."
The older cousins jumped and kicked them out. We told them, go away and go play with each other. We are older. The little ones walked down the hallway, crying, and we knew what was going to come next. Our parents began to yell from the kitchen for us big kids to let them play. Our parents were very threatening at this point. If one of the adults made their way down to the other side of the trailer, it would not be for nothing. A flock of little ones walked back to my mother's bedroom with a big smile on their face. We, the older cousins, upset that now we had to let them join us, really annoyed us. I just went back to the spot where I had been sitting before the kids showed up. One of the little ones, excited, said,
"So what are you guys playing? What are you guys doing?"
As I contemplated going to my room, locking myself and being alone, when suddenly one of the older cousins, we will call him B. B stands up, throws the scary stories to tell in the dark onto the bedside table, goes to the door and says,
"I know what we can do. We're going to play a scary game, so if you can't take it, leave this room."
He then sees the kid sitting on the bed and says,
I need to talk to the older cousins.
And we followed him to the hallway. I asked him, what are we going to do? He looked at the little ones now on the bed, looking out, trying to listen. He pulls our heads together in a huddle. B tells us, let's scare them, so they go away and leave us alone. Let's call it Scary Room, and invoke the spirits of this house to freak them out. I will turn the light off and you grab one of them and scare them like it wasn't us. We laughed and agreed. We walked back into the room and closed the door. B said to the little ones, us big kids were playing Scary Room and invoking spirits before you came to bother us. If you were too scared, you can leave. If you stay, you can't be a baby. You have to leave if you cry, and if you tell on us, we are not going to play with you outside or in the corner pecan fields. A little bit of backstory. My uncles are all farmers. Then B said, we are turning the light off after I invoke the spirits, and I'll count to 10. All the young ones get in the middle of the bed, and us older ones will be on the edge to protect you. Then B said, not him. He would flick the lights. The younger cousins were excited. They kicked off their shoes, and then they put their shoes in the back of the door, jumped on the bed and laughed. Us older cousins took our shoes off too. We shrugged and thought, good idea, we don't want to step on them with shoes on. Suddenly, B stands close to the light switch in character now, shushed all of the little ones giggling, and then looked around the walls of the room, began to say,
to the spirits of the ones who have died in this home and this land.
Immediately I felt something in my pit of my stomach. Not only did he invoke the trailer, anyone who had died in it, he invoked the spirits of the acre land the trailer sat on.
Let us know if you are here,
he continued. He was focused. I was not sure if it was real or if it was a joke anymore, and he turned the light off and began to count. Fast.
1, 2, 3, 4.
At first, I was frozen. The creepy words he said echoed in my head, and I asked myself, what are we doing? This is wrong. Then I heard one of my cousins scream, and I can feel someone drag. I remembered my role then. I turned without hesitation and grabbed my cousin's leg, the one closest to me. I had decided in the beginning it was her who I would grab, and it was time for me to play my part. She kicked, and suddenly I realized the count was
8, 9.
Immediately I jumped back on the bed to my spot.
10.
The lights come on, and 3 of 8 young cousins are on the carpet crying, running back to the bed. From the kitchen we hear our parents asking in Spanish in a loud, angry tone, what's going on in there? All of us older cousins began to say things to the younger crying cousins like, you can't cry or tell, you have to leave if you cry. Still crying, they all wiped their snot away and said loud and upset,
We're not crying. I'm not crying.
We tell them they need to leave and they're not old enough to play with us. They all jump back on the bed and stop crying. They begin to say,
I won't cry no more. I know it's you guys. I'm not scared anymore. You guys got us. It's fun.
One of the little ones runs to the door and yells at her dad,
We're playing, Dad. We're having fun.
Not a few seconds ago I had dragged this child on the carpet and she had cried with snot coming down her face, and now she's yelling down the hall to her father, It's fun? The older cousins all looked at each other. I'm annoyed now this backfired. The little ones now yelling to us,
Scary room. Scary room. Scary room.
B turns the light off and begins to ask,
Did you die in this home? 1, 2, 3, 4.
And when he got to 10, the light came on. The little ones would run back to the bed from where we dragged them. This really was fun. I was laughing and really into the game. My mother's bed was a mess, the blankets now on the floor. I remember thinking it was a good thing my mother's bed was low to the ground, so when we dragged the kids off the bed, they wouldn't fall as hard. As our eyes began to get used to the dark, we realized the streetlights came in through the window. This is when we decided we should throw a blanket over the curtains so it could be pitch black. The game continued. Occasionally, B continued to ask random questions before he counted. B then asked one of the other cousins if we would flick the lights and count so he can get in on the leg dragging action. I, without hesitation, go to the lights. I turned the lights off before everyone had gotten settled. I thought the element of surprise would have been funny. Only as soon as I turned off the lights, I felt a deep feeling of dread. I did not count. I found myself facing the closet's sliding wooden doors. No one moved. It was dead silent. Everyone froze. Then I heard like I was underwater, barely audible words, my cousins calling my name.
Guys, you're supposed to put the lights and count.
I could not count. I was scared. Frozen. Someone bumped into me and then the light came on. It was my other cousin. We will call him C. He made fun of me and said, "I will flick the lights, you suck at it." I went to the bed and took his spot, but I did not pull anyone's legs. I remained facing the closet, no longer frozen but still afraid of something every time the lights went off. Then C turned the lights off, and this time I see something. I run and turn the lights on and open the door. And I tell them, "No, guys, let's not do this anymore." B lets go of his brother's leg now, and he goes to me, closes the door, and with what I can describe as an evil smile, he comes up close to me and asks,
What did you see?
I, not wanting to scare the little ones, put my back to the bed and whisper, "I don't know. There seems to be a light in the closet and something moved." He smiles big now and puts his hand on the light switch and turns it off. He says out loud,
We have invoked something or someone. It's in the closet.
It's quiet now and we could all hear B walk to the closet door and slide it open. Everybody starts asking him what he's doing. We can hear the closet door rolling on the wheels. We start to ask, "Do you see that? What is that?" Clearly we can see blue lights, like small door frame with blue lights on the other side. I run and turn the lights on and open the door. B, angry now, goes back to the door and begins to close it. I argue with him about how we should not be doing this and how we have gone too far. I look at the little ones and tell them to come with me to the living room. None of them want to go. They want to keep playing. They don't care what I have to say. All of the cousins begin to tell me to leave. I want to, but I'm conflicted. Do I leave and let them continue alone? I can't. I don't trust them, and my little brother, 6 years old, he does not want to join me. I can't tell the adults what we're doing. That was out of the question. We never told on each other. I went back to the bed and sit close to my little brother. B turns off the light. I begin to talk to the entity in my mind. We are sorry we disturbed you. We are children. We are young and dumb. Do not show yourself. Do not be angry at children. We sat in the dark, dead silence for what felt like 5 minutes, when suddenly we could hear B sliding the closet door closed. One of the older cousins yells at him,
B, leave it open.
Immediately B answers on the floor directly in front of me. And he says,
It's not me.
I jumped up off the bed, ran to the light and turned it on. I looked over at the closet. The closet door was now closed and there was nobody near it. I thought, there's no way B could have closed the closet door and walked back to the edge of the bed without us hearing him. We were so quiet when we stopped talking. We would have heard his footsteps. I looked around the room. We were all afraid. I could see it. I had goosebumps on the back of my arms and in the back of my neck. I put my hand out and my little brother ran to grab it. He and I stepped outside of the bedroom door, and we looked back. The little ones one by one got off the bed and walked towards us. I walked the little ones back to the living room, and the older cousins all ran out of the room, joking, laughing, yet afraid of being the last one in the room. I would like to tell you that that was the only time we did this. It was not. We actually got into the habit of doing this every time our parents played cards, and this was very often. Just about every weekend. We all loved that game. It was a thrill when we got bored. My family got together almost every single weekend to play cards, cook, celebrate a birthday. We alternated houses where we got together at. My grandmother had 12 children. Each one of my grandmother's children got married. They all had children. A week had gone by since we discovered Scary Room. It was a Friday. Some of my mother's brothers and sisters came over to play cards and to let us cousins hang out. The minute my cousins walked in the door, they all asked, "Are we going to play Scary Room?" I told them, maybe we'll play, and then distracted them to follow me outside. We played until the sun went down, and when we began to walk to the trailer, the young cousins all surrounded me. They began to ask, "It's dark now, can we play Scary Room?" Without hesitation, the older male cousins, who had overheard them, said,
Fine, let's play.
I decided at this point if 7 and 8-year-olds were not afraid, it wasn't that scary anyway. I went to my mother's room and we placed a blanket over the window to make it darker. B, of course, wanted to flick the lights. He seemed to like having control over it. He turned the lights off and began to count fast to 10. We played a few times. At first it was lots of fun and we laughed. And we made fun of the ones who screamed. I began to try and drag the older cousins because it was funny. They didn't expect somebody to try and drag them. It was even funnier because they screamed. They screamed more than the little ones. At one point, B said it was getting boring, and I offered to flick the lights so he could play and pull on someone. He agreed, and I went to the lights. The young cousins all moved away from him, laughing and yelling, not wanting him to reach at them. I turned the light off and began to count, when suddenly one of the girls screamed. This was a different scream, a terrified, a horrible scream. Somebody had dragged one of the little ones into the closet. She came out crying, unable to catch her breath, pointing at me. B went too far. That cousin decided she did not want to play. She cleaned her face and walked to the door, staring at the closet the entire time. We all agreed that was not okay, and we made it clear that we were not pulling the kids into the closet. B became upset. He told us we were a bunch of babies. He crossed his arms and sat on the bed. We continued to play and we ignored B. After a while he became bored. He stood up and said he wanted to flick the light. Before he turned off the light, he looked over at the closet and said,
Spirits in this house, come play with us.
He turned the light off and he began to count. I wanted to play, but I didn't want to do whatever it was he was doing. It was all a joke. We weren't supposed to actually be invoking spirit. I was getting ready to get up and leave. I don't know why, but I was starting to become scared every time he spoke. What came next, until this day, I still don't know if he did on purpose or if it was something else. He began to count.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 6.
And then silence. None of us spoke. Suddenly, in the closet was a blue light. It was back, and this time it looked like a door, a small blue outline of a door. We all began to scream and talk about the light, speculating on what it was. It was fun at first, and then I got that eerie feeling, the goosebumps in the back of my neck. I looked around the room. The blue light was now so bright enough for me to see, B's glossy eyeballs staring at me. I can barely make out his face. B was now facing the bed. He was not facing the closet. He was quiet, standing there still and silent. I stood up and stared at him. The rest of my cousins did not notice that he had been staring at us. I walked directly in front of him. I reached over him to find the light switch. I could see his glossy eyes followed my face as I searched in the dark for the light switch. His face now inches away from mine. When I found the light switch and flicked it up, when the light came on, I could see his expressionless face staring at me still. Suddenly everyone began to laugh and yell and run out of the room. The game was obviously over. The next day was the day that I have marked as the day the house began to wake up. This night was very exciting for me. I was 12 years old, and my family had decided that I was old enough to babysit the cousins. I was going to make money today. I had always watched my cousins outside while their parents played cards in the house, or while they did barbecues, but now it was just going to be me. I was in charge, and I was going to get paid. That was my favorite part. When the little ones asked if we could play Scary Room that night, I decided absolutely not. Not without adults in the house, we were never going to play. What I didn't know early in that night, and had I known, I would not have offered to babysit. The house was awake now, and all I had to do was listen. By about 10 p.m., the cousins and siblings had all began to go to sleep. I set everyone up with their siblings with space for me to walk between them on the floor, on blankets and sleeping bags. My older brother slept in his room with similar-aged cousins on his carpet on blankets. I put in a VHS movie, and I lowered the volume very low. I expected they would fall asleep to the movie, but my cousins voiced concern that I would fall asleep before them, and they were afraid to be awake alone. And so they asked me to sing to them. I am not a good singer, but I always did what made them feel comfortable. I sang lullabies back to back, and in the end I settled for a Spanish lullaby, and I just repeated that one over and over again. Until when I stopped, nobody would sit up and tell me they were still awake. This, by the way, went on for about 20 minutes. I stopped humming the lullaby, and I waited to see if anybody sat up to make sure they were all asleep. And when I was completely sure that I was the last one awake, I reclined my sofa. I pulled my blanket over me, and I myself fell asleep. A few hours later, I was awake. I opened up my eyes. The screen was blue. That meant the movie had ended. When out of the corner of my eye, down the long dark hallway, where the light was still on, I could see someone walk. It was a woman with long dark hair. She stepped out of my mother's room, the room in which we played Scary Room. She walked in a strange way, something like what I would describe as a claymation motion character. She walked as if her feet were stuck to the ground and it would stick when she walked. She walked into the door immediate to the left of my mom's room. That was my mother's bathroom, the one I never used, the one with mirrors all around. I never looked in her direction. I was terrified of looking directly at her. I had only looked at her through my peripheral vision. I was terrified if I looked over at her, she would come down the hallway. When she was finished walking into the bathroom, I asked myself if this was really happening. And then I started to rationalize that maybe one of the children had gotten up and went to the bathroom. It couldn't be. She was tall, she was thin, and she had long dark hair. I know what I saw, but I had to tell myself something. I finally gathered the courage to look in the direction of the hallway. There was nothing now. I slowly stood up out of my recliner. I walked to the hallway entrance, and I stood there looking down the hallway for what seemed like forever. I don't know what I was waiting for. I looked in the direction of the children, and I quickly counted heads to see if I was missing any of the children. They were all there. They were all accounted for. I looked down the hallway, and the only door that was open was my mother's bedroom door. Now I hated being there, alone with the children. I remembered my family telling me they would be back at 2 a.m. I looked up at the clock, and it was 5 after midnight. This scared me even more. Midnight? I was raised thinking that midnight was the witching hour. I was getting ready to run down the hallway, knock on my brother's door, and wake up the older cousins to tell them what had just happened. Even if they didn't believe me, I just wanted somebody to be awake. When suddenly, from behind me, I heard somebody run out the wooden steps. And then I heard the doorknob jiggle. I was so relieved. They're home now. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to tell them what happened. I just need to open this door. I ran to the door, I unlocked it and opened it. And with a big smile, I was about to tell them, "Hi, everybody." But when I opened the door, horror filled me again. There was nobody outside. There was nobody on the steps. There was nobody in the entire front yard. As my eyes scanned from side to side, there was no cars in the driveway, and the streets were dead silent in the midnight desert. I stepped inside and closed the door and immediately said, "You are not welcome here." I felt as if something wanted to come inside, and when I opened the door it may have, but I told it was not welcome. I felt the thing outside was evil, and it was worse than what was already in the house. I felt like now I needed to address the entity inside the home. Turned down the hallway, and without words, in my mind I told it that I was sorry we disturbed it. I decided the best thing was for me to put on a movie for distraction, even though for the remainder of the night I remained horrified and facing the hallway. It felt like an eternity. After 2 a.m., the adults showed up, and immediately I felt relieved. The fear all melted away, and I was so sleepy I went directly to my room. I closed the door, and I must have fallen asleep as soon as my head touched the pillow. I could hear my mom saying goodnight to everyone at the door. I woke up later that night. It was around 4 a.m., and I needed to use the bathroom. I found that instead of using my bathroom that was 5 feet away from my bed, I walked all the way down the hallway and into my mother's master bathroom. When I finished using the bathroom, I got up to wash my hands, and my eyes went over to a razor next to the sink. My mother had a bad habit of feeding a pencil through a razor and using it to shape her eyebrows. For a few seconds I stared at the razor, and then I looked over to my left into the infinity reflecting mirrors. I stared at the first reflection of myself and glanced at the infinity, then back at my first reflection. I looked deep into my eyes, and I imagined myself using the razor to cut my wrists, allowing the blood to slowly drip out of me. The images I had were calm, relaxing, and even beautiful. I know now that is the call of the void. It's a feeling to suddenly want to die by suicide. My listeners, let me tell you, the call of the void is horrible. If you ever have it, snap yourself out of it and tell yourself to stop it and distract yourself immediately. Do not listen to the call of the void. In this image as I bled, I looked over at the mirror, and the reflection of myself began to turn into that dark figure that I had seen walking into that bathroom earlier that night. My eyes began to turn white. My jaw began to fall off, making it seem like I had a huge, disgusting smile that tore from the edge of my lips all the way to my ears. I turned my face and eyes to the floor and I rushed out of the bathroom. Confused when I got to my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to think of what happened and why I made my way to my mother's bathroom. I used to sleepwalk from the time I was about 7 years old, and this is the only reason I could attribute to myself walking down there. I must have been in a somewhat sleep-like state because I would not, fully awake, walk to that bathroom, especially not at night. A few days passed and my aunt, we will call her S, and her daughter, R, were going to stay with us for a while. S had just gone through a divorce and she needed to stay somewhere while she got on her feet. On this night, my grandmother was also in town. She decided to stay with us for the night. My mother decided she would sleep on the sofa and her sister and her mother could sleep in her room. My cousin R slept in my bed with me, and my two brothers slept in my older brother's bedroom. My little brother was used to sleeping in my mother's bed. This is important for the rest of this part of the story. That night we all went to bed very late, a few minutes after my mother had turned off all of the house lights. She began screaming in the living room. The loud, frantic way she was yelling was terrifying. When I finally gathered the courage to get up, I could hear my aunt running down the hallway. As she reached my mother, I reached my door and flung it open. But I stopped at my door when I heard what sounded like my aunt slapping my mother and yelling and demanding that my mother control herself. R was now sitting up and crying. I closed my bedroom door and I went to comfort her. I could hear through the door that they were talking, but I could not make out what they were saying. My aunt walked my mother to her room, and I could hear her say, "I'll sleep in the living room tonight." I could also hear her say that it was nothing and that my mom was crazy. I laid back in bed. Not 2 minutes went by when my aunt began to scream, and from the hallway I could hear my mother yelling to her sister that she was coming. When she reached my aunt, she began to tell her, "I told you, I'm not crazy." This time my grandmother followed, and the three of them went to the kitchen. They sat on the kitchen table talking, confused about what had happened that night. Occasionally my grandmother would break out in prayer. The next day a few family members came over. They told us children to stay outside and play, but I came back in through the side door. I knew they were going to talk about what happened last night and I needed to know what had happened. I snuck into my brother's room that was closest to the kitchen and opened the door very quietly so I could hear. They began by saying, "There's something here in this house," and my aunt said, "We need to get her out of here," referencing to my mother. My mother sat there sniffling and crying. My aunt began to say that this was not the first time something happened. I was so confused. What else had happened that I didn't know about? S began to tell her brother the story about what happened last night, when suddenly my mom stopped her sister and began to tell the story herself. She said what happened was, when she laid on the sofa it was very dark, and she had just began to face the cushions, and she felt someone pat her shoulder and down her back. Thinking it was my 6-year-old brother, she turned around and without hesitation put her arms out. She reached out into the dark for a few seconds and whispered, "Come here." He was attached even more to my mother since his father had passed away. Suddenly she froze as fear consumed her when she realized he was not there. She reached down to her feet and grabbed her sheets and pulled them all the way up over her head. Suddenly her sheets were pulled all the way down to her feet. This is when she began to scream. She said there was a presence there, she felt it next to her. She then told my uncle, who was standing next to her, how her sister came down the hallway and slapped her several times. My aunt, upset, defended her actions. She said she was afraid my mom would scare the children. She thought my mother was going crazy. She then began to explain what happened to her. She explained she traded places with my mother. And then she said, I turned all the lights off and lay on the sofa, and immediately something very heavy sat on my legs. She continued to repeat that it was very heavy, and she could not get up and she could not move. Something was sitting on me, she said. And then she explained that when she began to scream, her sister ran down the hallway and it all stopped. She continued to tell my uncle that the house was haunted. My uncle told my mother that she needed to move out. A few days passed and my mother was trying to break her lease. And on this day, my cousin R, who was 8 years old, and I arrived on the school bus. She mentioned she really needed to use the bathroom. So we speed walked a block to the trailer. I unlocked the door and she ran to the bathroom. My bathroom was between 2 rooms. One of the doors was a regular wooden door, and the other one was an accordion plastic sliding door. As she ran to the bathroom, I took my backpack off, and I began to take my shoes off. I heard a loud bang, and I could see R ran out of my room. Her pants were still down to her knees. She was running, she was pulling them up. She was crying, and I told her to pull her pants up. I demanded that she tell me what happened. She said she closed the accordion door, and she sat down to pee, when the door pushed inward towards her, and the hard plastic bubbled up, and then a piece of plastic exploded and hit her face. And in the hole that was left, she could see an eyeball. As stupid as it sounded, there would have been no way she would have ran out of there half naked. I contemplated she might have accidentally made a hole in my door, and now she was making up a lie. She was not the brightest kid, and in the past we have caught her lying. She was only in there a few seconds. When she finished putting her pants up, she ran behind me and out the front door. I bent down slowly to grab my shoes, not taking my eyes off the hallway. When suddenly those goosebumps in the back of my neck stood up, I began to walk backwards out the front door. When from what seemed like my mother's room, I heard my mother's voice yell my nickname. She was calling me. That was not my mother. My mom's car was not home, and that meant my mom was not home. There were no cars in the driveway. It did not take my mother long to come home, and when she did, she stared at us both outside the house. She was suspicious. She didn't say anything. R could not stop talking about what happened to her. Even though nobody believed her, I believed her. I don't know why I didn't want to tell anybody what I heard or what I'd seen. Maybe I felt that if I did not feed into it, it could not hurt us. In the coming days, when my brothers and I were home alone, I could hear my mom's voice from her room, calling on one of us. We all heard it. This happened several times. We would look at each other and say, "Don't go. Mom's not here." And then we would ignore it as if it had not happened. This seemed to work. My mother broke her lease, and on the day that we were moving out, I went to the closet, and I apologized. I thought that that would be the end of it because we moved. But when that blue door was open, and something came through, one of them followed my family. Until this day now, in my mother's home, when she's not there, we can hear her call us from her room. And even visitors who come over have heard her call their names. My brothers and I just stop that person, and we tell them, "Don't go. Mom's not here." To all my listeners, don't forget to subscribe for my future videos. And now I want to ask you a question. Do you want to play Scary Room with me?